everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I am going to address the age-old but really few weeks old hot buzz question, which is, does Twitter sell books? I mean, this is the age-old because we've been debating the real value of social media and selling books for a long time, and this is by no means a definitive answer. This is my opinion, but most recently this discussion was kicked off once again. I mean, Twitter is cyclical, and of course we're talking about Twitter. An author tweeted in response to one of those funds, like, what's a universal truth of your industry that is, like, accepted but no one talks about? And Adam Sass, the author, and I'm going to put his tweet on the screen, he tweeted that Twitter doesn't really sell books. And then he clarified in subsequent tweets that what he means is Twitter is just never going to move the same number of copies as a robust traditional marketing plan. That Twitter and the sales that it might generate is like a drop of water in the ocean. Like, that's my phrase. He didn't say that. But his tweet upset a lot of people, and it kicked off, the Twitter discourse, as it is apt to do. And several people agreed with Adam and tweeted about it, and I agree with Adam. I mean, spoiler, I'm going to lead you with this. I completely agree that ultimately Twitter doesn't really sell books. But let's discuss this. Like, what are the nuances here? Because I think context is very important. Adam is a traditionally published author. I am a traditionally published author. And I've also been on Twitter for 11 years. Wow. 8 or 9 of those years as an aspiring and then published author. And I mean, generally, here's the catch-22 about social media. I mean, this could be, does social media sell books? But I wanted to focus specifically on Twitter. And the catch-22 is yes and no. You need to be on social media if you are a modern author. This is because author engagement and essentially availability to readers is very important nowadays. People expect it. And essentially the social networking aspect is incredibly important as a modern day author. You need to exist somewhere on the internet in a way that people feel that they have access to you and they can feel a connection to you. And it's actually that connection and engagement that makes them more likely to buy your book. This is just the new way that buzz and interest in titles tends to be generated. And it honestly does suck because it means that your social media game can be make or break. Not always. If you have a mediocre social media game, but your publisher really kicks ass on your marketing, you can be fine. But the good thing is, in terms of what little we can control in publishing, is if your publisher doesn't come to the table with a kick-ass marketing campaign, you can overcompensate with social media. And we've all seen someone overcompensate with social media and actually make a difference. But the question becomes, what is that difference in terms of actual sales and raw sales? Of course, most marketing honestly is anecdotal. It's actually surprisingly hard to get provable ROI, which is return on investment, on different marketing tactics, especially when it comes to something like, well, with social media, you could put link tracking on something for purchases, but so often that's just not how it works in consumer culture. So day job is marketing. Hi. And the thing is, people often have to see a marketing message 8 to 10 times for it to be sticky. And that's if they are going to be a customer. And the thing is, it's basically you just being in front of them and reminding them, and eventually it'll click. And then they could go to any number of places to make that purchase, and you're not going to be able to track which marketing it was that was effective and reached them. That's my long way of saying, can we really ever prove the value of social media? It's difficult. But speaking of anecdata, there are some authors who spoke up in this whole thing. Chuck Vendig, I believe, is one of them, who noted that he has all of these followers and he'll throw up a tweet and maybe sells 10 copies. Now, 10 copies is 10 copies, and that's nothing to sneeze at, but it is true if you think, well, if other marketing channels and other traditional distribution channels are selling thousands and thousands of copies, what is 10 copies? And so I think that this argument is a matter of scale, and the people who were really, really upset about this universal truth are people who have invested a lot of time into Twitter as a marketing platform. And so my position here is that I do recommend reframing how you view Twitter. And I think the problem with Twitter is that Twitter is a bubble. The thing is, most social media sites can and usually do become bubbles. I mean, think about Tumblr. Tumblr culture, I mean, LiveJournal used to be like this. Facebook, you know, if you think of a person that you know who like lives on Facebook, whereas you don't, and social media is so often all or nothing. You either really, really care about this social media space or you don't care at all. There's very often not a middle. So meaning the point is, I think that what gets heated in the Twitter debate is that there are people who basically live on Twitter. They've invested so much of their energy and their time and especially their marketing platform into Twitter. And so it's a really upsetting idea, someone saying, well, it doesn't even really sell books because, well, as I mentioned, social media is one of the few things that feels in our control as authors. I mean, it is in our control as authors in the sense that we control what we put out onto the internet and we can control the time investment that we make in different platforms. And I think that people get upset and emotional when someone says to them, you know, that one thing you have control over that you've invested a lot of time in, it's a complete waste of your time. But I don't think it's a complete waste of your time. I think the key is to reframe what Twitter is for. I genuinely don't believe Twitter is directly going to sell a ton of copies of books. Think about yourself. How many books have you bought because of Twitter? I mean, literally because of Twitter. It's almost never a direct cause and effect, like, I saw this book on Twitter and I went to Amazon and bought it right away. It's usually a combination thing. I can definitely think of a few authors where I basically bought their books because I like them as people. I got to know them first on Twitter because Twitter is primarily about networking, which I'm going to talk about. And then most often, I also meet them in person. And what's really interesting about Twitter, really any of the social platforms, but particularly Twitter as it has been for traditional publishing, you definitely feel like you kind of know people, especially if you're a mutual follow, if you engage with each other a lot on Twitter. So then you see them at a festival, an event, you can go, hi, and it becomes this like social lubricant for getting to know people. And honestly, once I've met someone, if they're a really nice person, I will probably buy their book because I want to support them. Thing is, does that mean I read their book? Not always, which is a whole other conversation. But think honestly about how many books you've bought because of Twitter. My numbers are very low. I'd be shocked if it goes into the double digits, honestly, mostly because I have a lot of other primary reasons that I am personally going to buy a book. Most of the time I actually have to want to read it. My buys where I buy it because I like the person are more rare. So really think about how you interact with and engage on Twitter with authors, fellow authors, or if you are a reader watching this, think honestly, how many books have you purchased because of Twitter? Especially because someone tweeted a buy link. I would argue most of us, the answer is honestly not a lot. And if the answer isn't not a lot, you're probably an outlier. And I suspect that some of the individuals who got upset about this tweet probably are outliers. And there's always going to be outliers, but for the most part, when we see someone who has, say, 3,000 followers or 10,000 followers, there's often very little scalable difference in terms of their concrete sales reach between that and over 100,000 followers. It's been a long-held wisdom that follower count doesn't lead to sales or to equivalent sales. I think that's pretty commonly accepted wisdom, but for some reason saying Twitter doesn't sell books like really gets people upset. Again, I think it's because of the control and the time investment. So the reframing that I recommend is to think of Twitter primarily as a social tool, social media, on two ends. One, as I mentioned, when we like people, when we feel connected to them and engaged with them, we are more likely to buy their book. But it's not necessarily going to be a direct relationship between Twitter. But I do think Twitter is one of the most accessible platforms for building that author identity that makes it easy for people to connect with you. That said, you could also do Instagram or YouTube, though my general recommendation if you do YouTube, is that you combine it with at least one other that has some more direct interaction, because people do look for more organic, direct engagement, though the nice thing on YouTube now is that we do have our community tabs, but Twitter definitely provides that in the moment conversational type engagement. And I do think that it is very important and has its place. So on the reader side, think of it that way. Don't think of it as if I reach X followers and do X number of tweets, I'm going to sell X number of books. But think of it as a broader engagement strategy. And this actually reminded me, I did have one semi-viral tweet about my name. And Amazon, and let me tell you, I did not see a sales spike. You know, so when people do like their little like SoundCloud link as the second tweet to a viral tweet, that almost never works. I didn't see a boost in book sales, and I would argue most people don't. Nothing substantive, nothing more than a few book sales. And hey, it's great to get a few book sales, but Twitter fame doesn't necessarily move copies. So the other side of the reframing, seriously, just think of it as a social networking tool, and it is a networking tool. Twitter has ended up being a massive tool for the publishing industry. Both self and traditional publishing have communities that are really robust on Twitter, and it's a great way to network with fellow authors and industry professionals. As I mentioned, you can show up at a festival and kind of know someone through Twitter, and it does make it easier to strike up conversations and forge relationships with people. I have found that Twitter has just been great at relationship building, and really any social media platform has this potential. Again, age. LiveJournal was like this in Harry Potter days, though I don't think we technically call that a social media site, but it totally was like early social media. It was a way that you felt really intimately connected to people. Tumblr performed much of the same function, and you meet in person, you're like, oh my gosh, well that is incredibly useful in publishing. You could potentially forge relationships, obviously fellow authors, there are great bloggers on there, agents, editors, etc. That said, warning, 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 don't be wary of thinking of Twitter too transactionally, because generally, as a human, but especially in an industry like publishing, if you start to think of every relationship as transactional, that can be really inorganic and turn people off and just make people dislike you. Meaning it's very clear that your aim of forging social connections is to use people to get to other places. So that's just my tiny warning. It is both an excellent social networking tool and also a double-edged sword, because I do see some people work Twitter real hard, and it's a little too transparent. So definitely go in clear-eyed and with a good spirit. So I'm saying Twitter doesn't really sell books. Well, what does sell books? So in the traditional publishing context, which was the context of the original tweet, very important to contextualize that, what the author was pointing out is true. Adam is absolutely correct. Compared to your traditional publisher essentially doing their job, things like having their sales force get you distribution in lots of different places and paying for marketing, even just some of the free marketing that they do, they often have way more reach than you. But honestly, don't underestimate the value of your traditional publisher talking you up to booksellers and librarians. They are going to be hand selling or moving a lot of copies of your book. And this brings us to what is a very important facet of marketing, which is word of mouth. And word of mouth marketing, it's a great buzz term, and it's kind of lightning in a bottle. Everyone wants good word of mouth marketing because people tend to trust people who they trust to recommend things. And so, of course, a huge part of what your publisher does with their connections is they are generating word of mouth buzz marketing with booksellers, librarians, teachers, bloggers, etc. That's part of what they do. And so thus too, we cannot underestimate the value of Twitter or any social media platform, because this is your ability to generate your own word of mouth marketing. And I think this is where the debate gets a little bit heated, where people are like, but it can sell books. Yes, it can. Word of mouth is very valuable, and some visibility on a social platform, especially Twitter, can definitely generate word of mouth marketing. The trick is, again, that provable ROI. It's notoriously difficult with word of mouth, but also it's not necessarily going to give you raw direct sales, but you never know if the person who you reach on Twitter who really likes you, but maybe doesn't buy your book, they might recommend it to a friend or mention it on a panel. So thus, there is inherent value in really any social media. I just think it gets sticky when it comes to raw, provable numbers of selling books. And this is where the debate kind of got sparked. So those are my thoughts on this topic, on essentially the value of Twitter when it comes to selling books. I will tell you, I have even more thoughts when it comes to other social media platforms. I think they're all a little bit different. I have less formed ideas about Instagram because I'm less active on Instagram, but I do have a lot of thoughts on whether YouTube can sell books. So I'm probably gonna do a video on that, but I do consider that a whole other discussion. So give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and maybe I will go ahead and make that YouTube video. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, guys, happy writing.